Howdy, Spencer here. Another episode of Self-Funded Sketchbook. This time we're covering the crazy thing called the Aggregating-Specific Deductible, or sometimes called the agg-spec. If this is the first video you're watching in this series, I promise you're going to be lost. Okay, so do not start here. There's a few more that you'll want to go backwards in time and watch before you try to understand this concept right here. We're going to combine specific stop loss with aggregate stop loss to create something called an agg-spec deductible. I know a lot of terms that you probably haven't heard a whole bunch, but once you get a better understanding of this, you'll probably have an understanding of one of the most complex forms of stop loss insurance. Here we go. Ooh, aggregating specific deductibles. I feel like I need to crack my knuckles before this one. So aggregating specific deductibles, otherwise known as an agg-spec. If this is the first video you're watching in my series, stop right here, go backwards, watch my specific stop loss explanation, my aggregate stop loss explanation, and probably you should watch the lasers video as well. We'll link all those down in the comments. Highly recommend you don't start with this one before you've watched those others. Okay, so what is an agg-spec? I'm just gonna go ahead and define it first, and then we have a visual to help you understand it. So an agg-spec is a second stop loss deductible above the specific, you got my bad handwriting there, above the specific deductible that must be satisfied by one or more claimants before reimbursement from the stop loss carrier happens. And so when I say one or more claimants, I'm going to explain that ultimately multiple claimants can combine in order to satisfy that second layer. Think of it almost like a family deductible. Okay, so let's look at an example. $50,000 spec, which I've used in my previous videos for consistency. Now we're going to add a $50,000 agg-spec on top of it. So if this agg-spec did not exist, and we had a claimant above $50,000 or multiple people above $50,000, as soon as that $50,000 threshold is met, all of those claims would be reimbursed by the stop loss carrier. In this scenario, where there's a second layer, this agg-spec or family deductible, we now have to also satisfy that additional $50,000. So in this example, I have a $55,000 claimant, a $70,000 claimant, and an $80,000 claimant. None of those individuals have gone above both risk layers. But 70,000 is 20,000 over, 80,000 is 30,000 over, so that's 50. And then 55,000 is 5,000 over. So $55,000 total over spec. Well, in that situation, we've now also satisfied the second layer in the agg-spec, so that $5,000 left over is now reimbursed by the stop loss carrier. As soon as this second layer has been met, then stop loss in the normal way with regular $50,000 deductible kicks in, and all claims after that point are reimbursed normally under the contract. So one or more people can satisfy this. If this was a $110,000 claimant, that $110,000 satisfies both layers, and then $10,000 would be reimbursed. So it could be 2, 3, 4, or 1, or 5, or whatever the number may be. The key point being it has to go through both layers before any kind of stop loss reimbursement kicks in. What will happen is there's kind of two scenarios where an aggregating spec will be useful, or an agg-spec. One is, let's say an employer decides to add one onto their policy. If they voluntarily ask to add one and it's not doing it, because they're trying to manage certain risk, and they just say, hey, I want a $50,000 agg-spec. What will happen is they often get a dollar for dollar reduction in their premium. So that $50K agg-spec in that situation will almost always result in a $50,000 reduction to premium. And so they've essentially traded lower dollars of fixed costs for additional dollars, equivalent dollars of variable risk. That's scenario one. Scenario two is, let's say a group is trying to come into a captive or wants to go self-funded, but they don't have a lot of data, and it looks like there might be some big claims out there, but we don't know who they are. If we did know who they are, we could laser them. If we don't know who they are and we can't name them, then ultimately an agg-spec may be a way to still bring them into a world of self-funding, but now you add an additional risk layer that protects the stop-loss carrier for the unknown risk that's out there. If that scenario plays out, the employer does not typically get a reduction in their premium. So all they're getting in that scenario is a little bit more exposure that helps protect the stop loss carrier and still probably keeps the premium down a little bit. But ultimately that is more of a defensive move by the stop loss carrier rather than a proactive move by the employer to lower fixed costs. This is likely one of the more complicated strategies you're going to see in stop loss insurance and self-funding, but in certain unique situations, it's definitely a good thing to look at as a lever to pull. One thing to note is after you pull this lever, it's very unlikely your stop loss carrier is going to take that agg-spec away. It's kind of once you pull it, it's pulled and you're sort of at the discretion of that stop loss carrier in the future. It can also go up over time as well. So just because you have a $50,000 agg-spec this year doesn't mean that carrier might ask you to raise it to 70 or 80 or 100 the following year. And so in very unique circumstances or situations, I would recommend looking at something like this. Or if it's the only way for this group to get to transition into self-funding, then maybe an agg-spec makes sense. And eventually it might drop off the policy over time as well. So the key difference here is this is a shared deductible or a shared layer on top of a spec rather than just an individual specific deductible like specific stop loss. So I'm sure we'll have some questions on this. Hopefully I did a decent job of explaining it, but thanks for listening to the video about aggregating specific deductible or agg-spec.